Greetings, family. Welcome to the African Exodus show. I am your host, Tierney Cherie, here to you with a new video. Before I get started, I do want to remind you all, please do look in the description down below and click on the link to my Telegram channel. That is where I update you all on the videos that I post. This is a way for me to be in communication with the people, even if something were to happen and my channel were to get shut down. So please do add yourself there. Today, we're going to talk about weather. We're going to talk about what the scripture says about weather for our weather forecast segment, which is perfect because it's actually raining right now, so it all meshes in together. We're going to talk about what the scripture actually does say. Last week we covered the Euphrates deception, the idea that the Euphrates drying is the drying of the Euphrates as is mentioned inside of Revelations. But it's important for us to know, even though this is being used as a deception, at the same time, there are things that the scripture does point to as far as things that would change in the weather, how things would come apart inside of society, how things would get out of order. And so we're going to talk about that with special emphasis on a scripture from the book of Enoch. But first, let's actually deal with the scriptures that are inside of the Bible if you have a typical Bible. That is Isaiah 24, 5-6. The earth was also defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore hath the curse devoured the earth, and they that dwell therein are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men left. And we're going to go to Luke 21:11. This is a prophecy many people have probably heard, because this is spoken by Yeshua about the times, the end times. And great earthquakes shall be in divers places, and famines, pestilences, and fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven. These are common scriptures that people read to understand what the times will be, how things will change in the weather, as far as what we can observe. But there's a scripture that many of you probably have not read because it's in Apocrypha, and Apocrypha means what? Apocrypha means books that have been hidden away from you so that you do not know. Now, the book of Enoch, another vital book, along with Jubilees, you need to read Enoch, honestly. It's going to make things make so much sense as far as the beginning of creation, but also as far as how things are transpiring right now. Now, Enoch talks about weather changes, and I'm going to flip through some articles just to show you how these things that have been said are actually in motion as we speak. So let's talk about it. Enoch 78, 2-8. This is through the Ethiopian Bible, by the way, because I think the chapters are different depending on which Bible you go through. So it says, in the days of the sinners, the years shall be shortened. Let's pause right there. The years shall be shortened. Do you know that the years are already being shortened? The years are becoming shorter and shorter as we go on. Reading through this article, many of us wish we could get through this difficult year as quickly as possible. Seems the earth feels that way. It's been spinning unusually fast lately. 2020 included the 28 shortest days since 1960. Now, it should be noted that this is happening off and on, but certain years do get shorter than they did before. And particularly 2020 had the shortest days on record, while 2021 was predicted to be even shorter. Scientists monitoring the Earth's rotational speed expect the trend of having shorter days to continue through 2021. According to their calculations, on an average day in 2021 would be about 2 minutes shorter. That is 86,400 seconds. Over the course of the entire year, atomic clocks will have accumulated a lag of about 70 milliseconds, I believe that it is. For comparison, in the past, they ran fast by a few hundred milliseconds per year. In fact, this year, 2021, is predicted to be the shortest in decades, before the current speeding up. The last time that an average day was less than 86,400 seconds across a full year was in 1937. So very interesting. Enoch says that the days will get shorter. We've seen in 2020, 2021. Couldn't find the data for 2023 or 2022, but we do know that in these recent years, the days have actually been getting shorter. So let's go back to the actual scripture. It says that let's go back a little actually. So it says, in the days of the sinners, the years shall be shortened, and their seed shall be tardy on their lands and fields. And all things on earth shall alter, and shall not appear in their time, and the rain should be kept back, and the heavens shall withhold it. What did we talk about in the last video for this segment? We talked about the fact that all over the world, rivers are drying up. Rain is being held back. This was prophesied in Enoch. Now, it also says, though, that in those times, the fruit of the earth shall be backwards, and shall not grow in their time, and the fruit of the tree shall be withheld in their time. Something else that we do also see happen, obviously, with the different climate change. Climate change is real. The climate is changing. The question is, what's changing it? Now, I want to also point, though, it's not just food that we know is being grown in different seasons as opposed to where they're supposed to be grown or being grown less. Food in general is different today than it was in other times. So very briefly, reading from a segment of this article said, why modern food lost its nutrients. The nutritional values of some popular vegetables, from asparagus to spinach, have dropped significantly since 1950. A 2004 study found important nutrients in some garden crops are up to 38% lower than they were at the middle of the 20th century. On average, across the 43 vegetables analyzed, calcium content declined by 16%, iron by 15%, phosphorus by 9%. The vitamins riboflavin and ascorbic acid both dropped significantly, while there were slight declines in protein levels. Similar decreases have been observed in the nutrients present in wheat. So fruit is even going backwards. And what does Enoch say? It says, in those times, the fruits of the earth shall be backwards and shall not grow in their time, and the fruits of the tree shall be withheld in their time. But it goes on with more detail. It says, the moon shall alter her order and not appear at her time. Something else that's been happening and is happening more and more. Let's go through this next article. How quickly is the moon moving away from the earth? The moon is moving away from the earth at about 1.49 inches per year, and it moves away. Its orbital period increases, and the earth's rotation slows down. Looking at the average rate of retreat over the last billion years, it should take about 50 billion years before the moon takes as long to complete one orbit as Earth takes to complete one rotation. That's what scientists are estimating. However, we know when a time comes, these things will be speeded up for the season that is supposed to happen. So this is something, again, that Enoch did predict, though, is that the moon would change its order. What else does the book of Enoch predict? So it also says that in those days the sun shall be seen, and he shall journey in the evening of the extremity of the great chariot in the west, and shall shine more brightly than accords with the order of light. Okay, is the sun shining brightly? Actually, it is. I kid you not. So the sun is getting brighter. Is the sun getting brighter? How NASA scientists are tracking solar activity to look for weird behavior. They said the sun has been making headlines recently. Some of you might remember. NASA announced it released its biggest solar flare for 12 years. This was pretty unusual considering it is supposedly heading into a period of quiet where activity on the surface becomes muted, also known as a solar millennium. Scrolling down in the article, it says, what happens to the Earth's temperature? Ask the question, what happens to the Earth's temperature when the sun changes is a combination of what the sun does and the reaction of our atmosphere. The base temperature of the Earth increases as the sun gets brighter and decreases when the sun gets dimmer. The atmosphere of the Earth then increases that starting temperature. I want to give a possible explanation. Could climate change be a result of the sun getting brighter? If the sun is getting brighter, then certainly it would have that type of effect on the earth. Now we know the article says that the sun is currently going through a phase where its brightness should be slowly increasing. That is what they're saying. Slowly the sun is increasing. So the repeat, it says, in those days the sun shall be seen, and he shall journey in the evening on the extremity of the great chariot in the west, and shall shine more brightly than accords with the order of light. Now this part gave me chills because I want to paint the scenario for you, or paint the scene for you. We know today what's being reported all the time. UFOs, not just by the UFO community. It's actually being spoken about by United States officials. I think mosquitoes are attacking me. United States officials are also talking about UFOs. This part right here really, really, really was amazing to me to read. And as many chiefs of the stars shall transgress the order prescribed, and these shall alter their orbits and tasks, and not appear at the seasons prescribed to them. Oh, if you don't know, when the scripture talks about stars, it's oftentimes talking not about the stars in the solar system, but talking about the fallen angels. Fallen angels, we will get into them in more detail, I'm very sure. But as far as who are these alien life forms that people keep talking about, if you read the book of Enoch, from the beginning to the end, it will be very clear that the so-called aliens is what people call them. This is actually matches the description of fallen angels. So when the scripture says, many chiefs of the stars shall transgress the order, and they shall alter their orbits and tasks, and not appear at seasons prescribed to them. And then it says, and the whole order of the stars, again, the stars put in fallen angels, shall be concealed from the sinners. And the thoughts of those on earth shall err concerning them. They shall be altered from all their ways. Yea, they shall err and take them to be gods. And that has happened not just in the future. It's happening not in the future, but it happened in the past. These fallen angels were mistaken for gods. And then the last scripture says, and evil shall be multiplied upon them, and punishment come upon them, so as to destroy all. So this is what is being prophesied about weather. It's important to know, although the Euphrates drying up is not a fulfillment of Revelations, there are other scriptures that point to different changes in the weather and in the seasons. And based on these scriptures, things are going to get worse. We see things happening in the here and now. We see things changing gradually. But these changes are nothing compared to what is coming. Next week, what I believe we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about weather manipulation, to basically make this a series, as far as what's happening with the weather. There are things that are being done to exacerbate changes. Some of these changes are the earth, I believe, longing for or groaning because of the many things that are being done against the order of Yah on earth. But other things are going to manifest not because of the earth or because of Yah, but because of man trying to control things. So we'll talk about that next week. But the thing I want you to be left with is to know that the seasons changing, the orbits changing, all of this is pointing to we are in an age that is going to basically be, all likelihood, the end age. We know that we're in the end times. So how close are we? I don't know, but I can tell you from the scriptures and the manifestations of them inside of the world that we can observe that we're coming to a change very soon. We're coming to a new eon where we're going to see things shifting away from the old world order and towards a new world order. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this video and thank you all for watching. I will see you all in the next video.
It seems to me that Jewish involvement in that transatlantic slave trade precedes by many, many years, perhaps by 1,000 years, the actual beginnings of the transatlantic slave trade. And let me explain. It seems to me that the most important theoretical underpinning for that transatlantic slave trade was what has come to be known in many quarters as the Hamitic myth. Some people call it the curse of Ham story. When the slave trade developed, beginning in 1441 and for hundreds of years thereafter, people who prosecuted that trade looked around for intellectual justification, for rationalizations, for pretexts, if you will. And a variety of pretexts were advanced to justify the slave trade, to allow people to sleep well at night, for their consciences to be clear. One justification was that Africans were heathens. They weren't Christian, they were heathens, and therefore it was all right to enslave heathens. It would not be all right to enslave one's Christian brother, but it would be okay, it would be morally justifiable to enslave a heathen. That was one kind of rationale that was advanced to justify the slave trade. Another rationale was that Africans were less than human. Africans were devoid of reason, could not reason, were a subspecies of creature. They weren't human, and therefore again, whereas there might have been some moral opprobrium attached to enslaving one's fellow human beings, in the case of Africans, since they weren't quite human, that kind of treatment of Africans was okay. The authority for this idea was said to reside in the book of Genesis, in the story in the book of Genesis. Now, there's a story in the book of Genesis, and there's an interpretation of that story that allowed it to be used to justify African slavery, and they're two different things. The story in Genesis is in Genesis. It's been in the Bible ever since. But the sort of spin that was put on that story that enabled it to become the basis for the Hamitic myth actually comes out of the Talmud, the Jewish holy book, the Talmud. Somewhere around 500 AD or thereabouts, the Babylonian Talmud. Let me just describe the difference between the story as it appears in the Bible and the story as it was spun in the Talmud. According to the Bible, Noah, after the flood, apparently had a vineyard someplace, and he partook of the wine that was produced out of his vineyard. He got himself drunk one night, went into his tent, took his clothes off, as people often do when they get drunk. And according to the biblical story, he had three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Ham apparently entered the area where his father was lying in his drunken, naked stupor, and Ham, in an act of disrespect, gazed upon his father's nakedness, and apparently went back outside and informed his two other brothers of his father's condition. According to the biblical story, the two other brothers then came inside the tent or wherever, and out of respect for their father, they kind of backed into the tent. They would not look directly at him in his naked condition. They backed into the tent, they covered him with some kind of a garment, and according to the biblical story, when Noah revived, when he, arose from his drunken stupor and realized what had happened, he then cursed Ham's son Canaan and all of his descendants forever, and said that they would be the servants of the descendants of the other two brothers, Shem and Japheth. Somewhere along the line, I'm not quite sure how come, but somewhere along the line, somebody came up with the notion that Ham was the progenitor of the African race, and Shem was the progenitor of the Asian race, and Japheth was the progenitor of the European race. So Noah had three sons of three different races, and he cursed his African son and their descendants, and said that those descendants would be the slaves, the servants of the Asian branch of the family, and also the European branch of the family forever. And that's as far as the biblical story goes. The Talmud, which of course, my understanding of the Talmud, I'm no expert in the Talmud, but my understanding is that the Talmud consists of interpretations, what they call glosses, on various biblical stories. And these glosses or interpretations or spins are supposed to give people who subscribe to the Judaic religion a sort of an authoritative guide as to how to interpret the biblical stories and whatnot. So what the Talmud did then, the Talmud came along, the Babylonian Talmud, around about 500 or so AD, and proceeded to spin this biblical story for reasons that are unknown to me. But Ham, again, was said to be the progenitor of the African race. Now, interestingly enough, I've read someplace that early Christians also accepted this notion of Ham being some sort of progenitor of the African race. But apparently, in the Christian tradition, the kind of, overtly racist implications of that fact didn't develop in the same way as it developed in the Judaic tradition. According to the Talmud, Ham was the original African, and when God, through Noah, cursed Ham and his son Canaan and all his descendants, he was in fact cursing the African race. Now, this was the unique new element to the story that the Talmud originated. That the curse on Ham and Canaan was not only a curse on an individual and his family, but it was a curse on a race. So here, this is the contribution then of the Talmud. That God, through Noah, cursed the African race. And the Talmud proceeded to embellish the story in the most delightful, should I say, ways. For example, the Talmud said that there was ample proof that God was in fact cursing the African race. It said, for example, that because Ham had gazed upon Noah's nakedness in the dark of night, that the African race was henceforth turned black. so that the blackness of the African became a sort of a visible indication of that curse. Now, these Jewish rabbis, the sages they call them, wise men who put together this Talmud, they actually invented. I mean, they sort of elaborated on the biblical story. It's like a jazz musician who improvises. Well, they improvised on the story. They did a whole elaborate improvisation in the story, and somehow, Lord knows how come, but they came up with the notion that Ham, when he went into that tent and looked upon his naked father Noah, that Ham bothered his father. He had anal intercourse with his father. And because he had anal intercourse with his father, that's the reason, and here I'm citing Blackman, that's the reason why part of the curse was to give black men large sexual organs. So all of this was part of the curse. The black skin, the big eyes, even the kinky hair too, big sexual organs, all of this. So, as amazing as this may seem, this transpired 1,000 years before the beginnings of the transatlantic slave trade. And when the slave trade came into being, this notion of the Hamitic curse was revived, and it became, both for Jews and for Christians, it became the most pervasive of all the attempts to rationalize that slave trade. Let me quote the exact words of Harold Bachman, lest you suspect that I'm making this up. I'm quoting here from Harold Bachman, the dissertation I mentioned a minute ago, The Ebb and Flow of History. Quote, "There is no denying," this is on page 34 in case anybody who has the book feels like reading along with me. I know several of you have the book on it. This is on page 34 in the middle of the page. Second new paragraph. "There is no denying that the Babylonian Talmud was the first source," and listen to how unequivocal he is here. It was the first, the very first. In other words, this is Bachman from the Simon Wiesenthal Center acknowledging that the Talmud was the place that invented the story of the Hamitic curse. "There is no denying that the Babylonian Talmud was the first source to read a Negrophobic content into the episode." Here he is referring to the episode of Ham looking upon his father's nakedness. Ham is told by his outraged father that because you have abused me in the darkness of the night, your children shall be born black and ugly. This is in the Talmud. "Because you have twisted your head to cause me embarrassment, they shall have kinky hair and red eyes." So if you ever wondered about the origin of the kinky hair and the red eyes of black folk, here you have it. "Because your lips jested at my exposure, theirs shall swell." That's why black folks have thick lips. "And because you neglected my nakedness, they," that is your children, the children of Ham and Canaan, "they shall go naked with their shamefully elongated male members exposed for all to see." So there you have the origin of a whole variety of stereotypes pertaining to Africa. So the Hamitic myth then is where you really have to begin, in terms of a discussion of the Jewish role in the slave trade. They provided the rationale par excellence for the prosecution of that slave trade.